That would have been good. So I think, unfortunately, we are still a few people short who've registered and said that they're coming. And obviously we have invited quite a few people that have expressed an interest in this topic, but I am also aware that sort of time is ticking. We've got quite a few people that have agreed to come here and share their learning and share their knowledge and wisdom. And we're hoping to get a few questions. So I think we'll probably just sort of start, and if people join midway, we'll sort of catch them up. And obviously if everyone's happy recording and sharing it with the people that have expressed interest in it, that'd be smashing. So with our work with the Rural Design Centre Innovation Project, we're talking to a lot of different communities across Northumberland. And there's obviously always lots of different challenges, but the theme that runs through them all is the strength of the community and the desire to get things done and to bring benefits to their communities and to their areas. And we have come across a number of people that are looking at community asset transfers and looking at getting different uses of buildings that are either not being used to their full capacity or are no longer in use at all, or at a risk of closing, and are keen to understand more about the process. There's a number of communities that are midway through the process, and some of them are finding it easier than others. Some of them are coming up against some challenges. I think there are some key things that are difficult for everybody. Funding is always one of them. Managing volunteers and keeping the momentum going seems to be something that people always mention. And obviously us at the Rural Design Centre, it's something we've had questions about, but we're definitely not the experts about. So we thought it would be really helpful to get people in who knew what they were talking about, who'd lived it and experienced it. So we're really grateful today. We've got some great people who've come to join us. So we've got Chris and Susie from the Plunkett Foundation, who sort of do this as their thing. So I'll let them introduce themselves and sort of talk about a bit more about what they do. We've also got Ian Headley here from the Community Regeneration Officer for Northumberland County Council. So he's going to sort of do a quick overview from the council's point of view. So obviously there's a lot of work that goes in if the community is doing a buyout from the council and from council-owned assets. And we've also got Moira here, Moira Kay from the Fisher's Arms in Horncliffe. And they, as a community, are going through the process and have done the bit about buying out their local pub for the benefit of the community and to be run by the community. We have got a couple more people hopefully joining who are partway through the process or looking to start the process. And I'm obviously hoping that they will join during the session. But if I could sort of hand over to the team from Plunkett just to kick off, say a bit about who you are and what you're up to, that would be smashing.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks everyone for the opportunity to join you this morning. Got a personal affinity with the northeast of England. My mother comes from Morpeth, and so it's great to connect and see any projects that are existing and kind of thriving in the northeast. So this morning, I appreciate obviously we've got other speakers that are going to be the experts in community asset transfer from the actual process from the council, and the real experts of how to really drive a community project forward in the form of Moira. But I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction as to who Plunkett Foundation is and the work that we do and the role that we play in facilitating and supporting community ownership projects. So I'm not going to go through an entire history, but basically Plunkett has been around for 100 years. Our origins are based on the cooperative movement and the cooperative model. And for the past century, we've been working with groups to look at different forms of land ownership and more recently in probably the last 30 years, asset and business ownership. And we promote community ownership as a robust and sustainable form of business that essentially brings residents together for common purpose, gives them the opportunity to create legal forms and community organisations that can be responsible and take on the ownership and the running of an asset, business or service. So obviously the community asset transfer process is a kind of more modern term, but it's quite a historic process of public land being transferred into community hands. But as part of the Localism Act, as we know, in 2011, part of the coalition government, they looked at creating a proactive conversation where communities were encouraged to look around them and understand what is important to them within their community. Are there buildings, are there businesses, is there pieces of land that mean something to them and can have demonstrable social, community, economic and environmental benefit to their local area? And if all of those are ticked, then could there be a consideration that is there an opportunity for the community to take ownership or the running of those assets that have been identified? Within the Localism Act, there are sort of two routes for a lot of buildings coming into community hands. Obviously, today we're focusing on asset transfer, which is the public owned, but often within the sphere that Plunkett operates in, where we are commonly associated for our work in relation to village shops and community-owned pubs, but we work with post offices, bakeries, libraries, bookshops, and anything that lends itself to collective community ownership. In those other forms of business, it's often a kind of private asset that is coming up for sale and is looking to be purchased. So it may have suffered due to market failure, or it may well be that the asset has just simply come onto the market at the right time and the community see that the opportunity for long-term future and sustainability is if it's in community control. Both of those processes, either publicly owned or privately owned assets, require at the heart of it all, and probably what Liz was referring to in terms of the strength of community, genuine conversations, genuine consultations, genuine opportunity to have those inclusive movements and groups at the heart to discuss why it is important that such assets come into community hands. If assets do come into community hands, are they liabilities? You know, there are many businesses and buildings out there that are not long-term sustainable. They are a liability because actually they do not generate enough money to make themselves sustainable. I'll come back to business models in a minute, which may sort of vary once they are in community hands. Once you have that sort of conversation and people have genuinely subscribed to the idea that an asset is important, so perhaps it is a community centre or a library, you know, thinking kind of publicly owned land, there is an opportunity to register the interest, and you know, all local authorities host their asset registers, you know, the assets of community value, and groups will actually have a chance to set out the reasons why that building is important to them. And whilst there will be some commonality in terms of the registrations that happen right across England, there will be unique perspectives that are relevant to an individual community. It may be the setting that you have. So I know of examples in Cumbria where, you know, yes, by a map, another community facility might only be a mile away, but you know, you've got to get around a mountain, a huge lake, and you know, have a sort of 2-hour round trip to get there. So the reality is you need to have the context and the nuanced understanding that only local residents can bring to that registration process. The council will look at each application that comes in, and if it's approved, it will go on to an asset register, or what they call an asset of community value, for a period of 5 years, which means that there is that element of protection that if it's a privately owned asset that comes up for sale, the community has the first opportunity to bid on it. But community asset transfer, as we're here to hit today, can be a more proactive conversation where the council, as part of their ongoing budgetary responsibilities, may be considering whether an asset could be better serviced and better utilised if it's in community hands. And I'll leave that to Ian to cover in greater detail in terms of the process that would be more aligned to that. So Plunkett's role as a charity that is supporting local groups will help to trigger and facilitate those early stage conversations and those consultations. We will give examples of where other groups have taken businesses and buildings into community hands and demonstrate that it can be done. We'll help groups actually, once you've done the kind of identifying of, yes, that is important to us, go through the process of, is it realistically something that we could come together and actually run as a business? And from that point, you have to start going through some of the more formal stages that will be associated with any business operation. You know, we need to have a legal form. Are we going to be an unincorporated organization? Are we going to be an incorporated organization? And this is where Plunkett's role and our network of advisors will come in, because of the fact that we will talk through the options and making sure that individuals that are becoming involved in the project are aware of the different liabilities that are associated with the kind of legal setup and the legal structure, but also the benefits of different legal forms. You know, it could be charitable, it could be sort of private limited companies, it could be community interest companies and social enterprise models. You won't be surprised, given that I touched on the fact that Plunkett's history is in cooperation. We promote the Community Benefit Society, for example, as a common legal form that many of the community businesses we work with. This is a modern evolution of the cooperative model, but it's based on the principle that every single individual within that community has the right to become a member within that society, but more importantly is potentially the opportunity that that organization can raise significant amounts of funding towards their project, either purchase or lease of a building through what we call community shares. Community shares or subscriptions or memberships, however they are phrased, are essentially a way that local residents can invest in a community vehicle, a community organisation, and operating on the premise of one member, one vote means that the most affluent members of the community are able potentially to invest more, and those that are only able to invest relatively small amounts will still have equal voting rights, because the principle is that it's community ownership genuinely built upon the process of democratic accountability of a broad and inclusive membership body, and that should be made up of local residents. The community benefit societies operate with a smaller management committee, which is elected on an annual process from the membership. And the membership has an initial kind of influx, and this is where Moira can speak in greater experience, because I know that the Fisher's Arms are currently going through this process right now, gives you that real groundswell of support and momentum for the project that demonstrates that this is a viable and long-term opportunity. I said I would touch on the business model, and the reason I do this is because the fact that, going back to that point of, is this asset and liability for the community long term? You know, Plunkett is not in the business of lumbering any community with a debt-ridden asset or a debt-ridden business that is going to become harder on, to run longer term and actually, not sustainable. Therefore, part of the responsible conversations we will have will help them to identify, is this going to be a business that is going to generate enough money, or is it an asset that's going to generate enough money to maintain itself? And often in those conversations, you have to start thinking about the additional, what are the new services? What are the other things that could be brought in that could be income generating? That, so you might see, within a community centre, it might well have just solely been hall hire from multiple groups was the predominant income stream prior to a community ownership project. Post a community ownership project, you might be thinking about repurposing an annex or some of the rooms for an enterprise hub, and in pandemic times with people doing more home working, could there be desk space to hire and a new income stream that's not in the business model right now? You could be approaching the library and thinking, could we co-locate? Could we get our services under one roof? Commonly you see pubs calling themselves more than a pub because of the fact that, yes, the pub business model is food and drink, but they're more often than not now hosting a cafe, a post office, a shop. They might be doing local food markets. They might be doing something for young people. They could be working with sort of health practitioners, running their clinics from there. And I think this idea that once an asset is in community ownership, because it's come about from community consultation, community control, and community are still involved in every aspect of the project, you are developing a business plan and an operating model that is reflective of what the local community needs. And therefore, in the asset transfer process, if you are thinking about how can we make this asset sustainable long-term, you're going to have those residents involved throughout. It's not a process of just identify it and then sit back and somebody else will take responsibility for it. This is a community-led project, community involvement, and community run for community benefit longer term. And I think that for me would be the kind of picking up on Liz's point, going back to that point that community is so important and strong in terms of how many rural areas are looking at the future of their assets and businesses. Those are the processes that we would encourage you to be looking at. So it is making sure it's an asset and not a liability, looking at a proper business model that actually makes it sustainable. Think about how inclusive and open you can be in terms of your membership, your consultation. Choose the most appropriate legal structure that is going to be right for you as a community and also able to be run longer term, and make sure you're accessing whatever advice and support you can get. Plunkett is one organisation that operates right across the UK, but we have partners in Northumberland. So there's Community Action Northumberland from the Acre Network as a great example of that. There's Locality as an organisation that operates across England in terms of the development trusts. There are multiple places that groups can access advice and support in relation to this. And it's so important. And I know Moira and all the Fishers Arms Group have done probably the most important thing of all. Network and learn from those that have been there before you, because they will know all of the pitfalls that you are likely to encounter, but also all of the successes that you should therefore be able to celebrate in your local community.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Chris. It's really inspiring, informative. I think it's, a bit of a learning curve for us here as well at the Royal Design Centre. And I think it's feels like quite a big challenge, but it is great to know that there is the support out there and there's the examples of people that are doing it and finding the success.
I'll share a couple of links in the chat group for further reading matter. I was conscious of not doing a bit of death by PowerPoint this morning. I wanted it to be a bit more conversational, but I appreciate there was a lot in there. So I'll put some reading links for people to take away. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Obviously, there's quite a lot of detail that you do need to go into, but it's awesome to get the overview side of things. That's fab. Thank you. Can we hand over to Ian at Northumberland County Council to do sort of a bit from the council point of view?
Hello, good morning. My name is Ian Headley. I'm Community Regeneration Officer. I sit within the Economic Growth and Regeneration team at County Hall. I cover town and parish council matters, including the charter that exists between the two layers of local government. I also manage the Community Chest Scheme, which is a grant scheme to community groups, up to £5,000. Deadline's 10th of June, if you're interested in bidding. There's another deadline in the end of September as well. I also cover community rights, community right to bid, which is part of the Localism Act, which has the register of assets of community value. I also manage the council's approach to community asset transfer. That's the assets that the council own. And I also do lots of other things. Recently, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Fund that managed anything that comes into the council with community attached to it, probably. So I've just focused on the community asset transfers. Now, the council has a massive portfolio of land and property in the billions of pounds in value. And most of it is used by the council. It's necessary, but there are assets, land and buildings, which are surplus to requirements from time to time, and also land and property which the local community themselves desire, but we would not otherwise be looking to dispose of. And I think those two categories are the sort of the main ones for community asset transfer. When the county council became a unitary in 2009, we inherited a vast amount of oddments of bits of land and buildings all over the county, which we've been very good at rationalising. Anything from a redundant allotment plot in the middle of a village behind the village hall, that why does a strategic authority need to own and manage that? Could the local community take that on and do something with it? A community orchard or a community allotment, or the local In Bloom group, could they take it on? So certain scenarios we actually animate and encourage interest in the community to take them on. Others is where particularly where the community might see there's a threat to the loss of an asset. It might be a community centre, it might be a library, where there's been discussion and concern over council services, and the community then come into action and say, well, look, we'll take it on. And that's happened in a number of scenarios. To be eligible, you have to be a constituted voluntary community sector group, a social enterprise, a local charity, or a town and parish council. In fact, those transfers are the easiest because you're transferring from public ownership to public ownership. And quite a lot of the asset transfers that I deal with are to that level of local government, and they're relatively more straightforward. So yeah, in terms of what I've been dealing with for the last 18 months when I took this on, it's everything from a small allotment plot all the way up to a redundant school with its car park, its buildings, its recreational land. an example of that would be Cornhill on Tweed, where the community, the transfer went to the parish council, but they'd set up a third-party organisation to manage the asset. And the idea is to transform it into a sort of a health and wellbeing centre with some office space to let out to make it more sustainable. And that seems to be working quite well. It's very early stages. So the scale can be from the very small to the quite considerable, because that site could have had a number of houses. But of course, the community have already had lots of house building there, and there's really no demand. So that wasn't an option in the end. So what do you do with a fairly modern building, really in quite a decent state, in the heart of a community? So there was a certain amount of animation. We went to the parish council and said, there's an option there if you wanted to put a bid forward, that we would consider a transfer. And a lot of work went into that. Now, in terms of my approach, if I have the time, I can invest some time in helping the group come along. So in that particular instance, I was able to help them with their structures, their governance, their strategic direction, a certain element of their business planning. So I was quite hands-on with that one. In terms of the process of deciding on the transfers, we have an internal officer working group that is drawn from strategic estates, from regeneration, and from planning policy. And they decide on the applications. And I deliberately don't take part in that process, so I can be even-handed between the council and the applicant and not seem to be partial on either side. So that allows me, in certain circumstances, to get involved in the project as well, to be a critical friend, to help them along, to advise. When it's a small allotment plot, they don't need that much help to help them apply. It's a simple application form from the very small to the very big. Obviously, with a big asset, you'd be looking for a business plan attached to it, perhaps. A small parcel of land, you wouldn't necessarily need that. There's in the application form, there's an allowance for projecting income and expenditure over 3 years. So I won't bore you with going through the detail of the application process. I mean, it's fairly straightforward, not too many questions. What I would say is, I always advise that the applicants concentrate on 3 things. Is what they're proposing feasible? Is it achievable? And is it sustainable? And that's the sustainability is the most important thing for the council, because we don't want to land a community group or a parish council with a massive problem. And indeed, in terms of negotiating heads of terms and exchanges, there may be some reversion rights to protect the community if it goes wrong, that it comes back to the council, or we might favour a more sort of maintenance and repair type lease of 21 years or 25 years, something like that, in order to help them with regular review periods. Because what we don't want to do is, we're here to serve the communities. We're not here to give them problems. So, and the other thing I would say is you've got to demonstrate community engagement. That's very important to us, that it's not just a couple of people in a community wanting something, that actually it's the community have said that this is the direction they want to go in. So that's very important to demonstrate that. I should say, if you're interested in what the council own, you can go to the council website and type in digital maps into the search, and the one you want to be looking for is called land ownership, and all of the land and buildings that the council own that are mappable are on that map. So if you want to look at your community and think, ooh, we could do with that, a piece of amenity land in the corner there, it's all laid out there. The application form details are on our website. I think it says Tony Kersop is the contact. Of course, he's just retired, so we need to update that. I was just looking at that this morning. So the forms say that as well. So we'll have to do a bit of updating there. But I mean, a first approach is an informal approach is always recommended, just to talk through with somebody who can point you in the right direction. And it might not be the right direction. There might be other solutions. I'll just leave it there. I won't go into the actual application form because that's dull.
Thank you. My main question, actually, or one of my main questions was going to be a lot of people come to us and say, how do we find out who owns this bit of land and is it available to talk to anybody about? So the link to the digital maps and the land ownership is going to be very well used, I think, in the next the next couple of hours. I'll be like Googling and searching.
There's a lot of useful information on the council website if you know where it is. If
you know where to look for it and how to, and you know that it exists. Just on, do you have a register of people, of landowners that aren't council, if it's, for example, a pub that's recently closed or something?
That would be on well, we have a register of assets of community value, which we have to maintain by law, subject to the Localism Act, and that's on our website. That needs to be updated with the latest edition to be added, but and a few to come off, because obviously after 5 years they expire and they have to be reapplied for by the community. So occasionally, you know, it has to be updated every now and again to account for those that fall off and those that are added. It's due to be updated, and that's mostly private. There are 1 or 2 bits of locally owned, council-owned land, but it's mostly private. Okay,
that's really interesting. We've got a community group interested in a pub that's been shut for a couple of years, so I might come and ask you some questions shortly. I think it's very early.
There are quite a lot of pubs.
Sorry, yeah.
Quite a lot of pubs,
yeah. So, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. And it's good to know, the support from local as well. And really good to know the team working on it.
And I'm happy for people to contact me directly with any questions or proposals.
Brilliant. Thank you. So Moira, I think, you know, you're living it, you're doing it, and working with the community there. So it looks like it's going well. I don't know.
Well, thank you for inviting us on. We are quite far down the route of buying the Fisher's Arms in Horncliffe on the River Tweed near Berwick upon Tweed. I'm going to hand over to Louise because she's got television and radio experience and is our group steering spokesman. However, at the end, I think we'd both like to know from Ian how safe the ACV is on the pub for the whole footprint of the pub, not just half of it. So how safe that, and putting it on. So you can answer that after Louise or now, whatever you want.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, the ACV that exists now for the pub will be there until it expires next year. Even if the transfer goes through, it still remains an asset of community value. And
but can we guarantee that it stays on the whole footprint of the pub, because you've already lifted 2 parts with an ACV on it?
That was way before I took over, and I understand why that happened. But what the asset that's currently listed is the actual physical pub. That will stay on until next year. The community will then need to decide if they own it already, do they need it to be listed again?
Yeah, we do. We've promised the community that's what we'll do, so we need to guarantee it'll come on for another 5 years in March.
Yeah. So what you'll need to do to make it seamless is apply about, I would say, 6 or 7 weeks beforehand, before it expires, so that it seamlessly goes through without a gap.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll hand over to Louise.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for having us on. In terms of where we are with the Fisher's Arms, we were aware back in 2018 that the pub was likely to be either redeveloped or sold or closed. So at that point, we put an asset of community value on the pub. That was a small group of people in the community. It's a privately owned pub, and what that asset of community value does is it stops the pub from being changed into anything else. So basically, I think the plan of the owner was to develop it into residential, and by putting the asset of community value on, we stopped him from doing that. So what the asset of community value does for you as a community is that if the owner decides that he's going to sell, that immediately triggers a moratorium. And you have 6 weeks to say to the owner, we've got an interest in this and we want to buy it. And then you have 3 months, which includes that first 6 weeks, to raise enough funds to actually make an offer on the pub. And then you have to decide, how are we going to as a community, raise the funds. So the first thing we did as a community group was we had a public meeting, and we said to everybody, do you want us to try and save the pub? And we did a kind of dot chart as people came in and said, does Horncliffe Village need a pub? And we had about 100 people at the meeting. The village is about 400 people, and 98% of the people that voted on that dot chart said, yes, very strongly, the pub is required. So we had a very positive public meeting at which everybody kind of urged us on and said, yes, please try and save the pub. So we got an interested group. We're about 9 of us that actually started doing the donkey work of getting the pub together. And I would say we had a discussion about, should we join Plunket, should we not join Plunket? If any of the groups are getting off the ground, I would urge you to join Plunket. They've been very helpful to us. They've taken us through all the stuff that we need to think about. You can put in for extra time from Plunket, and we've just done that, and they are helping us with grant applications. So one of the things I would say to anybody who's starting up is do the stuff that you need to do in order to get your community benefit society up and running. So you need to register with the Financial Conduct Authority, and that takes about 6 weeks. Think of our timescales. So we've got 3 months to raise the money or get the money pledged. So 6 weeks for your registration with the Financial Conduct Authority. You cannot get a community benefit bank account until you've got Financial Conduct Authority registration. So maybe another 6 weeks to get your bank account. So in the 3 months that you've got to raise the money, think that 12 weeks of that is going to take you to actually set up the mechanics of being able to do it. So the first thing I would say of anybody thinking to do this, get a committee, decide what your priorities are, and I would urge you that one of your main priorities would be to get whatever your setup is, whether it be a community benefit society, a charity, whatever it is, get all that in train and get a bank account sorted out. I'm a bit naive. I thought I could just walk into the banks in Berwick High Street and say, can I open a community benefit account? And they all went, oh no, we're not doing bank accounts for that. So you've got to find someone that will open it. And I think it took 61 days for us to get our bank account open from getting our accreditation. So it takes a long time. So find out if your community want it, put those 2 things in place, and then worry about everything else. Mo, that you've just spoken to, we're chalk and cheese. I'm very much a detailed person, and I like all the detail and having everything, you know, is it viable? Is it feasible? I did our business case, lots of figures, going and investigating actually the viability of it all. And I would not have stood up in front of our community and said, do this, unless I was fully convinced that it was a viable business proposition. And I think the things that give me sleepless nights are, this isn't my money. If I was just buying this pub, I would be absolutely at it. If I had enough money to buy the pub, I'd have bought it yesterday, because I think it's a fantastic thing. We found untapped income streams there that we think can bring more money in. But the thing that keeps me awake at night is it's not my money. It's the community's money, and we're asking people to give us their money. In terms of a community benefit society, we're trying to persuade people that it's not really an investment, or it's more of an emotional investment. You're emotionally tied to the pub and you want to keep it going. We cannot promise anybody in our village that they're going to get a big chunk of money back from investing in the pub. We might be able to do a bit in terms of a small percentage, but that depends on how profitable the pub is and whether we can work out a profit share to give back to people. But that what we've put in our governance is you can't take your shares up for 3 years, because we think it's going to take that long to get it up running and bringing a bit of money in. So in terms of what we said, we set up the once we'd got our heads around what we needed to do, one of the first and most important things for raising the money, and this is where Mo is absolutely an amazing person for getting money out of people. I've never seen anything like it. But there was an impetus in the community as well to support it. So what we did is we thought the way to go is social media. So we needed a really smashing website. So we have someone we know that does really good websites. So Mo and I worked a lot with her to get the website to be visually attractive, but also for it to say the message that we wanted it to say. We didn't want it to be cluttered with a lot of information. What we wanted to say to people was, please pledge your money to save the pub. And that was the whole gist of the website. The other thing I would say is the people that were on the committee weren't very savvy in terms of social media. So what we did was we looked around for people that actually enjoy doing social media. We found someone for Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. So those were all set up as well. And something perhaps we weren't very good at was making sure that was all joined up so that what it said on the website was reflected in, but we've got a bit better at that now. So good website up and running. So in terms of support, we set the website up on the 16th of December, and we are currently, we have 208K pledges from local people. And in terms of grant application, we've done a bit of work on seeing where exactly that money is coming from, because if you want to apply for grants, you have to demonstrate, and demonstrate to everybody really that this is something that is coming from your community. It's not just me and Mo going, we want to buy the pub, let's get everyone. You have to demonstrate the community wants it. So in terms of where that money's coming from, bearing in mind I've said Horncliffe is a small village of 400 people. 57% of that 208K is coming from Horncliffe village, and another 22% is coming from the wider Berwick-on-Tweed area. So a 5-6 mile radius, 75% of that 208K is coming from that very local area, which speaks to us that it is something that this community really, really wants. I think in terms of fundraising and getting the media on board, one of the things Mo was very good at was stalking celebrities. So we knew that Robson Green fished on the Tweed. So I think we stalked him nefariously through a gilly and stuck a camera in front of his face and said, please tell us about your time you went to the pub. We knew that Cy King was very strong, one of the hairy bikers, very strong supporter of pubs. So we stalked him a bit, and then we found out somebody who knew him and said, do you think he'd do us a bit for the pub? And his was really good. So we've kind of been stalking people and finding ways of getting the media interested, and a lot of that has helped to kick our campaign and get people interested and looking at what it is we're trying to do. So where we are at the moment is we have just spent a week or so getting the website ready for the share launch, and we did the share launch on Monday. We didn't do a lot of razzmatazz on the share launch. We wanted to make sure that everything we put in place on the website worked so that we could actually get people's money. So it was a bit of a soft launch on the share launch. I think we've had about 33,000 redeemed pledges in about 48 hours. So we are hopeful that all those pledges are starting coming in. I haven't got a figure for today, but as of yesterday, that's where we'd got to. So we've got enough to pay the deposit for the pub, which was what we wanted initially on the share launch, and we've got enough pledges to buy the pub and do some initial work on it. We've still got probably about 1,000k fundraising still to do in order to pay to refurbish the pub, but buying it and securing the property and then doing initial bit of work to make sure it was safe and watertight and all of those things that you need to do is where we're at the moment. So I don't know if Mo wants to add anything else to that.
No, I don't think so. Just it's important to get the press and keep doing things in your village hall. We've got a plant sale on Saturday, which is for the whole committee. However, Louise is going to be there with the pledge forms, talking people through. So if anybody's got a problem, they know where we are and we're quite accessible. So we're always keeping the community involved with what's happening.
That's brilliant. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. It sounds like it's going really well, which is great. And you've had some really fast reactions from the community. It's interesting, like your first meeting, you said you got about 100 out of 400 of your local, very local residents. Do you think if you did a similar meeting now, or have you done similar meetings?
Yeah, we do. We do monthly meetings. It was the 16th of December, which obviously just before Christmas, and we still had some COVID. Okay. There's a lot of people in this village that are worried about coming out and socialising still. So whatever we do in terms of publicity, in terms of getting people to physically meet, it tends to be muted because there is still COVID concern. So we got about 100 at the first meeting. We've had similar numbers at all the other meetings, but we've also had social events and various things where we're trying to raise money, and you get a variety of different people. I wasn't concerned that there was only 100 people. We've got fairly elderly population in the village, so a lot of those people wouldn't turn out anyway. And some people aren't interested in buying the pub. And I think, you can bring as many of the community with you as you can, but some people will go, well, I never go to the pub. So, but there is enough of a groundswell. And I think, the money is speaking for itself. I think if this community didn't want it, they wouldn't be putting their money where their mouth is, really. Yeah. So I think it's very definitely there. And yeah, I can't walk down to the Memorial Hall and back without somebody stopping me and going, how are we getting on with the pub? And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to a meeting. So I think the other thing I would say is never underestimate the amount of work that's involved. I don't want to count how many hours I've put into this. As I say, I do all the nitty-gritty stuff. I like doing the business plan. I've done community benefit plan, and my husband does a lot of the stuff with Plunkett. And so I think what you need when you're looking at this is you don't just want you want a mix of people, you want a mix of skills, and if you haven't got the skills, like we didn't have the social media skills, go out and find them, because there's nothing worth, if you want a really good social media campaign, you need somebody who knows how to drive Facebook. You can't do it otherwise. Working on the website was fantastic. I've learned loads of stuff about website design and how that works, and I still write a lot of the copy for the website, and I'm like, come on, Louise, stop using 3 words when one will do. So that's all been very interesting. So it's not, we're getting something out of it as well. It's not just us, it'll be great, you get something out of it. If somebody asked me now if I would do it again, I think I'd probably have to think a little bit about that, because it is really, really hard work.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant though. I think
the other thing to say quickly is not to get despondent. We've spent hours and hours and hours on grants. I spent 10 hours on one grant, back and forward, for £500. We've just been told we aren't getting it. So you just have to keep persevering and not get too despondent when you're not back all the time, because we do need grant funding now. But Louise is good at grant funding and nitty gritty.
I was going to mention there's a tool called Grant Finder, which is a kind of an online database. Sorry, Chris has hand up, and I've just jumped in. So
Jamie, go for it. I think that was a really useful point about Grant Finder. Go for it.
Yeah, just and you can access it through, so the BIPC, which is the British Intellectual Property Centre, they have a centre in the northeast. As the centre is in Newcastle, but they've got hubs, and one of them was opened in Berwick recently, and you can access Grant Finder through. So they have guest accounts, so you can access it through them. So it doesn't cost anything. So you do it through them. I'll put a link in the to BIPC Berwick in the chat, in the kind of, and then follow up with that, just to kind of it's quite good because they update stuff quite a lot. So sorry, Chris.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the point I was going to make was I think the Fisher's Arms are a great example of that momentum, playing to people's strengths and being inclusive. So you're constantly looking for new opportunities for new people to get involved in the project. What they've achieved, if you don't follow them on social media, I urge you to, because actually they have managed to create a following and a conversation that is growing the profile of what is happening in Horncliffe, but is also now becoming a real contributor to the wider community pub sector. So, for context, there's 150 of these community-owned pubs that are now operating and trading in various different parts across the UK. And I think there are lots of commonalities amongst the business models, but the uniqueness of the settings in which they are found and what the communities are achieving is absolutely phenomenal. And I think learning from others, going back to that point of networking and momentum is really key. I think Louise spoke really well, and Jamie's just highlighted it further. Blended finance is something that all groups are likely going to need. So, community shares will only take you so far. Grants might take you so far. Some groups might look at loan finance to do, it might be a bridging loan for a short term to try and help you get over. It might be something related to repair, or refurbishment of a building. And it's looking and being open to lots of different opportunities in terms of finance. And of course, at this moment in time, the UK government has made the opportunity for community ownership a little easier for some, and I will put it as for some in bold, because the Community Ownership Fund exists as something which is £150 million available through till March 2025, and it will give groups like the Fisher's Arms at Horncliffe or other groups that are looking at this in that right moment the potential to bid for up to 50% of their purchase costs, up to an upper ceiling of £250,000. From a asset transfer point of view, Ian, as well, it can, in sports grounds and sports facilities, there's an upper ceiling of £1 million. So there is potential to look at groups being financially backed to actually take assets on. But I think Ian's point about making sure that these are feasible, achievable and sustainable still remain the critical points, because it's all good and well getting to the ribbon cutting ceremony and celebrating we've saved something and we now have it in community control. It matters very little if in 6 months' time you're already struggling to pay the bills. And actually in this moment, it's really responsible business planning that's required. And the commitment of people like Louise and Moira is an absolute testament to what can be achieved, but also an inspiration for others to learn from, in terms of, as Moira said, it is hard, but when you have successes, celebrate every little step to help that momentum keep moving. So I can see Julie's got a hand up, so I'll pipe down.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there funding available to actually do feasibility? Because we've got a great idea in Holtwhistle. We always come up with great ideas, but we need feasibility, and we haven't got that expertise. We need to know whether it can be done, whether it can make money, whether it's, is there anyone that can help us do that? Because that's what we need. And obviously it's going to cost some money. So anybody, any ideas?
Liz, are you happy for me to come back on that one?
Yeah.
So the form of funding that you're looking for is what you would call revenue funding. So it's going to be something that's purchasing for a service rather than purchasing capital assets. And absolutely there is, there's positive news which tomorrow, when the Community Ownership Fund's latest prospectus comes out, so it will be landing tomorrow on the government website. Plunkett will have it all over our socials, as I should imagine many others will. There will be included in future rounds the ability to incorporate and access some feasibility funding, which may help you get through some of those early stages, because at the end of the day, as you can imagine, with a government-led programme, they are probably even more so, considering all those concerns that Ian, raises, that the council has to tick off and go past. The business case has to be sound. So feasibility studies is key. But similarly, Julie, if you look on grant finding that Jamie has flagged as a site, you will be able to search for various funds that may offer some access to funding for revenue activities. But included in that funding package, going back to Moira's point, even the village fundraising and the kind of plant sales and the cake sales and things can get you that little bit of money to get going. The parish council might be able to stand some money from their own, coffers and give you that initial budget that says we are looking at this responsibly. But you're absolutely right. Complete the feasibility study as part of that momentum building in those early stages.
I mean, what is typically the cost of feasibility? Because I've been involved in some that are horrendous. You're talking 20, 30,000 pounds. I mean, what are we talking about for?
So I think it's to coin the old phrase, how long is a piece of string? It depends on which asset it is, what type of service it's running, how long it's been open, whether it's closed at this moment in time. All of the kind of aspects will come into it. There are things that you can achieve a feasibility study relatively low cost through just genuine community consultation about what does this asset mean to you? Have you used it? So, in terms of a village shop, one of the earliest conversations that I used to do when I did village meetings was, if we had a village hall with 80 people, 100 people there, you start asking a few questions. What would you buy in the village shop? Well, I'd come down on a Sunday morning and buy my papers and my milk. Well, the reality is that's not really giving me enough money to actually even bother turning the lights on. I can deliver the papers to your front door, and the milk can also similarly be put out somewhere for you to collect. So you start the conversations in a local area that genuinely get people business minding. So you think about what is the level of income we need to create to go forward. So I've given you a bit of a non-answer there, Julie, but it will depend on what kind of asset that you are looking at.
Basically, it's the first school, turn it into a walking and cycling centre for tourism and visitors. So cafe and outdoor activity, that sort of stuff, because there's not enough bed spaces in Hot Whistle, and the first school has just been closed and is about to go back to NCC. So this is the idea we've got, but it's how to take that forward. And
so your first thing should be to look at other examples. There are a number of kind of bunk houses like that in Scotland that have taken on previous school buildings and other assets that are now being run for community benefit with that element of accommodation, food, training, etc. built in. Yeah. There are churches that are now looking at kind of multiple use and premises and thinking about how they can build that joint. So that's your first stage, is to look at and think about how others have done it previously.
Okay.
Can I come in there?
Yeah.
I think also there will already be information that you can find, and Google is a wonderful thing, about what are your visitors' numbers, how many of those are cyclists, how many of them are looking for cheap accommodation. And I would think in somewhere like Hot Whistle, those numbers would be pretty high. Now, I can't off the top of my head think where you'd find it, but I'm sure that somewhere somebody knows that information. And
Visit Northumberland might be a really good shout on that.
Yeah,
really good idea, Louise.
So before you look about paying somebody, do a bit of donkey work yourself, so that you can say to them, we've got all this information. Do you think it, can we look at feasibility? Because, I mean, one of the things that it goes back to, it's not my money. So I'm going to do everything I can do, or get somebody else to do something to save a bit of money before we actually pay the professionals to do it for us. So I think there's information to be had, and it's just about, and once you find one bit of information, that usually leads you on to another bit of information that you think, oh well, that's really useful, and all of that. I think there's a lot of information on Plunkett about how you measure the benefits of what you're going to do, and look at the index of multiple deprivation and see, does that apply to your area? Are you an affluent area? Is there places where you've got gaps in services, which might help you to say, you know, we need this because we want to attract more tourists because we've got low unemployment. So all that kind of stuff is findable. Plunkett has got a lot of information about how to find it.
And just to add to that very quickly, we can offer free advice in the early stages. So we have our network of advisors that could be commissioned to come and work with you on 1 or 2 day basis to do those early stage conversations. So Susie's put a link in the chat to Plunkett and our community business map.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Has anybody else got any last minute rapid questions at all for anybody? Otherwise, I mean, that was, oh yeah, Susie.
Liz, sorry, just because there's some really useful information in the chat bar now, and I discovered recently that you can save that to your computer. And sorry if you all know this, but if you don't, if you open the chat bar up at the bottom, there's 3 little dots and you can click save, and then you can choose wherever you want to store it for future. So just thought I'd share that in case anybody else is in my boat.
That's brilliant, thank you. It took me a while to find that, I have to say. It made me happy when I did find it, so that was really useful. Really useful to share, so thank you. But yeah, thank you everybody that came along today. It was really, really useful, really interesting, really informative, and I hope it is all right to share it with a few of the other communities that we are working with. I'm sorry they didn't make it along today, but I think they'll find it really valuable, and obviously the links in there will be really helpful. And if anybody does want any direct introductions or contacts or anything like that, obviously just give me, Jamie or Charlotte a shout and we can help out with that.
You're saying there, Liz, that today has been recorded?
Yes, it has. Oh, yeah.
I have 1 or 2 people who would like to have come but couldn't manage, so, and they would pick that up through your design centre.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we can send that out.
Thank you.
We'll probably, if we upload it to YouTube, and then we can get it, we can share the link. It'll be easier, I think, than.
Yes, thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, we'd love to share the knowledge as far as we can. So yeah, please do feel free to let people know. Otherwise, thank you so much to everyone that came along, and maybe we should have a meeting in the summer in Horncliffe, I think.
Thank you, Ian, and we'll be in touch. Hopefully you already know about us.
Sounds great what you're doing.
Oh, that's just one of the schemes. There's more as well.
Yeah.
If only I could win the lottery, but I don't do it.
Right, all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.